going on, everybody? It is Wednesday. Here we are with 5 more awesome questions that all of you have posted for me. Now, again, my opinions here, just my opinions. And I know a lot of you agree with some of my opinions, a lot of my opinions, or not many of my opinions, all of which is totally okay. It's totally okay to not be on board with my opinion or anyone else's. That's the whole point, is that we all have opinions, and sometimes we agree with each other, and sometimes we don't. If you have a question for an upcoming episode, please do not hesitate to post a question. Again, down below in the comments, just simply type out your question. I got 5 great questions this week. There have been weeks I've had a lot. There have been weeks I've had very few. So in order for us to continue, I have to continue to receive some great questions. So again, please do not hesitate. This has been one of the best video concepts and reoccurring things, and I really do genuinely look forward to it. I also am really excited about the new thing that I've been doing, which is asking questions to all of you and then featuring some of your responses. And those are going to continue to be on Mondays. And these videos where you ask questions of me will be on Wednesdays. Again, my whole thing is that we have a huge community of very knowledgeable collectors. And there are a lot of people with YouTube channels out there, and they'll talk about their opinions and they'll share their collection and they'll talk about things that they're interested in. And I think that's great. But the thing that I want this channel to be about is a community of people who share ideas. That's one of the reasons that I encourage questions, I encourage comments, I encourage feedback, and I'm asking questions of you, just like you all ask questions of me. So, 5 great questions this week. Looking forward to seeing what you all think of my responses. But let's look at that very first question right now.
Do you think there is a lack of history being passed down from modern parents to their children concerning sports players? From what I've noticed, the younger generation seems to care more about the current hot players and have little interest in any player that falls out of current relevance.
All right. I like this question. My brain is taking me in a lot of places, different directions with this question. As a teacher, a high school teacher who's in a classroom every day with students, it definitely seems like there is definitely a different level of reverence and appreciation of history than there once was. For sure. It definitely feels that way. And I can give lots of examples, but it will take this conversation down a very political direction. And I just, quite frankly, don't want to go there because I want to avoid controversy when it comes to political things because it's so polarizing and, quite frankly, it's not enjoyable to me. But that's not your question. Your question is, does it seem like our youth are less interested in learning about history than in the past? And specifically, the history of sports and players. It does seem to feel that way to a certain extent. But I literally have been at shows looking through cases of vintage cards and seen kids 8 to 11 years old come up, and I literally saw their eyes that big go, oh my gosh, that's a Mickey Mantle card. Whoa, do you see that? And these kids just freaking out because of how excited they were to see a Mickey Mantle card. So there are definitely people out there. There are kids out there who do still appreciate that stuff, who are still interested in it. And I think that people are also always going to be interested in rare or scarce or uncommon. So none of us know what's going to happen with vintage cards as this next generation comes in. But you can look back and generation after generation and after generation have talked about how our youth isn't as respectful and doesn't care about history and that's just like the common old guy saying is, oh, these young kids, they don't have any respect anymore. Like, they've been saying that for generations. At the end of the day, I think that there's always going to be that demand for the big names and the rare stuff and the iconic stuff. I do believe that doing things at the National, where there's a section that's like a museum, where you walk through it and you see the 52 mantles and you see the game worn, Babe Ruth jerseys, and you see the Willie Mays game used bats, and that kind of stuff is important. And not to mention, the Hall of Fame is important. One of the biggest complexes in the United States for youth baseball tournaments is in Cooperstown. It's massive. They have like dorms and stuff where kids can stay to travel there for tournaments. And a lot of those kids go through the Hall of Fame. And when they walk through the Hall of Fame and they see things from Jackie Robinson, and they see things from Ty Cobb, and they see things from Walter Johnson, I do think that seeds are being planted. I do think our youth cares about this stuff more than we think that they do. And I think that our youth, as they get older, will have more of an appreciation of the past than it feels like they do right now. I don't think a lot of these kids are going to be obsessed with TikTok and Snapchat and these different social medias for the next 70 years until they die. I do think that at some point that distraction will be minimized and replaced with some level of appreciation. I mean, you can go through past generations and go, this generation this and that generation that. But at the end of the day, when we all start to get a little bit older and we start to kind of look how long is our future ahead of us, we eventually start to appreciate things that we hadn't previously appreciated. And one of the things that I think that as all of us get older, we continue to appreciate is legacy, because we think about our own, is family, because we think about our own, and history, because we think about, did we have any impact on it? And as a result, I do think, even though it may not feel like it, that at a certain point, even this young generation is going to be interested in the history of the game, in the history of cards, in the history of sports, in the history of the world and of the country, even though right now it may not feel like it.
Ever since I was a kid collecting, a Pete Rose rookie card was my holy grail. Now I'm much older and I could buy a nice graded copy. Instead, I buy piles of $10 to $20 cards of players I already have. Do you think I will look back in 15 years from now and regret my strategy?
All right. Now, one of the things that's fun about us collectors is a lot of the times we all think, man, am I the only person who's doing this or thinking this or feeling a certain way or wanting to change this about my collection? And we're all spread out. We're all over the place. And the beauty of technology is I think that we share things about our collections, our interests, our hobbies, our preferences, and we realize, oh, I'm not alone. There are actually other people who I am very similar to in collecting. This question I could have written myself. I've said for a while that I have 3 Grail cards. My main number 1 Grail card is the 1954 Topps Ernie Banks. Shortly after that card going onto my list about literally 35 years ago, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I started falling in love with the 57 Brooks Robinson rookie card. And then shortly after that, the 48 Bowman Yogi Berra. So you would think 30 years later that I would have all 3, but I don't have any of them. And I've talked about that. I've talked about the fact that it's kind of ridiculous at this point that I don't have them. I've spent large amounts of money on other cards, so why haven't I spent large amounts of money on these cards? It's a really tough question, and I obviously don't have a great answer because you're describing me. I guess my thought process is this. If you're truly a collector, you want to be collecting, right? You want to be adding to your collection. I've always been a collector. I would go on hikes as a kid, and I would pick up cool rocks that I had to keep and had to bring home. I would go to the beach and I would collect shells that I would find and I would bring them home. There are a lot of things that I've collected over time, and I like adding to the collection. A collector wants to collect. So it's really hard if you're saving up for an expensive card. And let's face it, the 63 Pete Rose rookie card is a really expensive card. And it's possible it will go way up over time. It's possible if he gets into the Hall of Fame, it will go way up. It's possible that it won't. It's possible the card will go down. Who knows? But it's expensive. And if we save up for this one thing, then we have less money for other things, right? So like a lot of us with our houses, okay? Now some of us own, some of us rent, whatever. But when you buy a house, there's that whole term of being house poor, right? Meaning so much of your income is going towards your house that you can't enjoy other things. So what a lot of people will do when they get older and in retirement age is they'll downsize. They'll get a smaller house. They'll free up some money so they have money to be doing other things. If all of your money is going towards your house, then it's hard to go on vacations. It's hard to have a nice car. It's hard to have these other things. And we only have so much money. So if all we're doing is buying big cards, that means we have less money to get other things, right? That's the whole economic term of opportunity cost. We only have so many resources. How are we deciding when, where, how to utilize those resources that makes us happiest? And I think the answer, and I've even on this channel a couple of times, I've made videos and I've said, guys, I need your feedback. I need your opinion. What do I do? This is where I'm at on the hobby, and I'm not sure I'm on the right track. Well, I think my answer or my response or my opinion on this is the whole thing is a journey. You don't drive across the country from, San Francisco in the Bay Area to, New York City and never make a detour. You don't have a straight shot across. You say, oh, I'm not that far from here. I'm not that far from there. My brother and long story short, my brother worked on the road for a few years and I flew out to visit him. He was in Akron, Ohio. No, he was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I went out to visit him and met up with him in Pittsburgh. And he had to drive to his next location, which was Akron, Ohio. And I was like, yeah, I'll go out there. We'll do the road trip together. And so I flew out to Pittsburgh, went to a Pittsburgh Steelers game. It was a lot of fun. It was a blast. And then on the drive to Akron, we're like, hey, let's go to Canton. Let's go and check out the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And we did. And it was awesome. And we're driving along and we're like, oh, there's Kent State. We're about to drive by Kent State. And, in history classes growing up, you hear about the whole Kent State riots, or not riots, protests. And you hear about that, and we're like, hey, let's check it out. Let's see, what the memorial looks like, and just to see where this thing is that we learned about in history class growing up. And we took detours. Collecting is the same way. We can take detours. We don't have to go straight from collecting 1987 Topps baseball cards to go directly to our Pete Rose Grail rookie card. We can go, for a while I'm into $10 to $20 cards. And then maybe I'm going to go into this for a while. And then I'm going to go into that for a while. My dad was all in on the 1960 Topps baseball set. He built the set, beautiful set. Average grade PSA was 8. Literally the average, still on the set registry. And then he said, I want to do the 59 set. He did the 59 set. He decided a few years later, I'm going to start liquidating some of these cards. And now he's really into the 1956 Topps set. It's okay. Part of the adventure is changing our opinions along the way, finding detours along the way, and evolving our card collecting strategy along the way. So will you look back in 15 years and regret your strategy? I don't know. I guess my question is, over the next 15 years, would you rather have a Pete Rose rookie card, which is your grail card, or be buying and selling and searching for and digging for all of these other $10 to $20 cards that you're picking up according to your question? What would be more fun? To have that one, or to be digging through all of these treasures and adding to your collection and changing your collection with $10 to $20 cards over the next 15 years? I can't answer that. Only you can answer that. But I think if you said, having my Grail card, having just a few cards is way more important to me if they're the cards I really want. It's the same thing with like friends, right? They say, would you rather have 4 quarters or 10 dimes? Would you rather have 4 friends that you're really tight with, that are important to you, or 10 friends that you're fairly tight with, you're fairly good friends with? What would you rather have? A few really nice things or several pretty cool things? Everyone's going to have a different answer. But the most important thing, in my opinion, is it's okay to change your mind. So maybe for a while, it's been the $10 to $20 cards, and you say, you know what? it's time to consolidate. Let's go get that Pete Rose. That's okay too. Or if you have the Pete Rose or the big card and you decide, I'm going to sell it off and go buy a bunch of different things, that's also okay. It's the journey, and don't forget to have fun along the way with the journey. That's my take.
I have several sets, from Kellogg's to the Whataburger Nolan Ryan set, etc. What are your thoughts on oddball cards and sets?
Oh, so the fact that I'm being asked this question now, and this just goes to show that I think we all have a constantly moving opinion when it comes to collecting. At least I do. I definitely have a moving target on my thoughts with cards. If you had asked me this question 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, I would have said, why would anybody buy an oddball card when there are a ton of great regular Topps base cards in vintage, or Bowman cards in vintage, or Leaf cards in vintage? Why would you stray away from that? There's a ton of great stuff. And my opinion on that is different now. Now I totally get why someone would want some oddball stuff. And I don't know if it's that I'm getting older. I don't know if it's that the hobby has changed. But like, there was a time I'd be like, why would you want like a red heart dog food card of Mickey Mantle? And now I'm like, ooh, check that out. That's an awesome red heart Mickey Mantle card, right? Like, my opinion has completely changed. Now, why is it changed? I don't really know. I think the thing that's cool is I think the internet and the fact that literally I can look on my YouTube analytics and see where people are watching my videos from. And literally multiple continents all over the world, which makes my mind explode, like makes my mind blown. But the fact that we're so spread out, something that maybe was common or popular in one region, one country, and was rarely seen in a different region or a different state or a different country, now you can find anything from all over the world. And so I think that things are much more accessible and we can learn about them. Like, I mean, as a kid, if you did a research paper, you would pull out an encyclopedia, and the encyclopedia would give you information on a bunch of different topics. So if I went to a card show and I saw a Mickey Mantle card that I had never seen before, it was not easy to find out what it was. You didn't know if it was common. You didn't know if it was rare. What you knew is you hadn't really seen it very often. And we went to big shows all along California. We went to some big shows, and I would see some stuff and I'm like, what is that? And you couldn't just Google it. You couldn't pull up the PSA pop report. You couldn't go on eBay and check comps. It was a completely different world. So I think part of the reason why I'm more open to quote unquote oddball cards, and everyone's definition of an oddball card is different, is that now we can learn about them. I can see a card I've never seen before, and I can look it up and find out, what is it? Where did it come from? Who distributed it? How common is it? I can find out all sorts of stuff. And that, to me, is interesting. When I see an oddball card or a regional card or kind of a rare card, and I can go, where did that come from? And I can literally, in a matter of seconds, find out the origin and what it's all about. That makes it way more interesting. It makes that makes that learning process, for me at least, interesting. The other thing I'd say is I feel like because we're exposed to so much, because of the connection from technology, that people are becoming more and more, it's more and more common that people are becoming super collectors. You see people who aren't just buying the Topps base cards. They're buying those rare cards, and they're hunting for those rare cards because that hunt is fun. So I think the growth of super collectors makes the demand for some of those oddball cards kind of, you feel more confident that others are going to continue to want it. And what we never want to do is we don't want to buy something thinking that eventually, in the not too distant future, it won't be worth anything. We might be collectors, but we also want to collect things that aren't going to be worthless soon. So we do want them to go up. So yeah, I think that oddball cards are cool. I think they're much cooler now than I used to. I think learning about them and seeing them and investigating them and researching them and digging for information on them, for me, is fun. And does that make me old? Probably. But look, I got the gray hair to prove it that I am. So that's okay. I like oddball cards, and they're growing on me quickly. So yeah, I think they're cool.
Do you ever show your videos in the finance classes that you teach? In some of the lessons, since there is a financial component to buying and selling cards. What are their thoughts on the hobby? Have any of your students started to collect modern or vintage cards?
So this is a super interesting question. You know, again, to those of you who are newer to the channel or haven't heard me talk about it, I am a high school teacher. I teach a little bit of computer class, but I also teach business finance. And so we're dealing with money stuff, and we're dealing with credit, and we're dealing with borrowing money, and we're dealing with interest, and we're dealing with appreciation over time, and we're talking about investing and down payments and monthly payments and amortizations. And there is some overlap with cards. For sure, there's some overlap. I actually think there's more overlap with economics. And economics, you know, when you talk about opportunity costs and you talk about, scarcity versus, high demand versus low supply, or high supply and low demand, and how does that affect, the market and the value of a card. And I believe that sports cards are an amazing way for young kids to learn about supply and demand. I mean, because cards are all about supply and demand. If we look back 2 years, there are guys on backyard breaks screaming because they opened a pack that had a Mac Jones card in it, and now Mac Jones is getting benched every week. And Mac Jones, will he even be the starter in a week or two? Should he be the starter? I mean, I remember they were talking, these same guys were screaming because they'd pull a Davis Mills card. And some people are like, who's Davis Mills? It's like, exactly, who's Davis Mills, right? It's supply and demand, and that's what cards are, is their supply and demand. Now, my finance class is more about money management. It's more about budgeting. I don't talk about it a ton with my students. Being a public school teacher of high school students is not always, completely the same experience that maybe we had when we were in high school. And, the way that we connected to our teachers. I try really hard to make my class relevant for my students, to make it interesting for my students, and to help my students for their future. I tell them all the time that my goal every single day is to make their life with money less stressful as a result of me being their teacher for business finance. But a lot of them, I don't think really, this is going to sound bad, I don't know how much they care about my hobby and my free time. Now, I will say this. All of my lectures for my class, I have recorded and posted onto a different YouTube channel for my students for their notes. So when I have a student and like they're out for a couple of days, they're sick, I have posted for them on a web page, on a website, every one of my lessons and lectures and teaching the stuff so that they can stay caught up, because I think each day is that important. So a lot of the video editing that I do on my channel, I learned actually because I had to learn it to be able to post these things for my students. Now, this is not something I'm required to do. It's something I want to do to help my students have every opportunity to stay caught up. But it's not something that I have to do. But it's something that I did, and it's part of how I learned how to do a lot of this technology stuff, posting things and changing the format of things and editing things. And so there is overlap from that regard. But I haven't done much showing of my students of stuff at this point. I've thought about starting a club. I've thought about starting a card collecting club because then I could use it as a teaching instrument for them, about life stuff. But it's more, again, I think it's more economics and more supply and demand than it is personal finance. And I have thought about that. But at the moment, I am so consumed with the things with my own family, outside of school time, that I don't feel like I have the time to do something like that justice. Plus, I spend a fair amount of time on this, and this is something that is important to me and I care about very much. And so it's not something that right now I'm ready to tackle with them, but in the future, it's something that I certainly would consider. So I don't have a great answer for that. I think it's a good opportunity to give students a practical way of learning things. And it is something that at some point I'd like to participate in, but at this point, I haven't.
I collect autographs. Initially, I decided to only collect the absolute top tier players, but then made the mistake of opening up the floodgates to tier 2 and 3 players. Do you have this issue? Initially focus on certain collectibles, and then it just inevitably spreads out of control. How do us collectors maintain discipline? Collecting is almost an addiction to where we're always looking for the next thing. Side question. Do you consider Ernie Banks a tier 1 or a tier 2 guy?
So this question made me laugh when you said I opened the floodgates to tier 2 and 3 players. So here's my take. Here are my thoughts. When we start a collection, we don't want it to end. The person who starts a player run on one of their all-time favorite players. So let's say you're a big Hank Aaron guy. And you say, I'm doing a player run on Hank Aaron. And you do your whole player run, and all of a sudden, you've gotten all the base cards on Hank Aaron, and you're like, I did it. You're not done. You just thought that you would be done. You're not done. Now what you do is you go, well, now I'm going to add all the all-star cards too. So then you go and you add all the all-star cards that of Hank Aaron to go with the base cards. And then you say, now I'm done, but you're not done. Because now what you do is you go, I want all the team leader and league leader cards that have Hank Aaron on them. So then you go get those. And you're still not done because you don't want it to end. See, that's the thing. You don't want it to end. So you just keep expanding. So then you go, well, I'm going to go with, some of the other things, some of the oddball sets. I'm going to go with the 63 Fleer set. And if the player that you collect, if you're a Sandy Koufax guy, I need the 63 Fleer. And then you start looking at some of these other sets and these regional cards and oddball cards like we mentioned earlier. And you say, I got to add those now. And then you get like every card you ever knew even existed. And then you go, well, now I need some of these other things that are collectible that this person is on. And now all of a sudden you're a super collector of that player if you're really into that player. So yeah, I understand what you're saying, but the problem is, and I know we all can relate to this, is we want to stay focused. We want to stay focused on the thing that we think we're most interested in. But it's so difficult to stay focused because every time we turn around, we see something else that we like. Don't ever take me to a food court, right? I go to the food court, I go to Disneyland, and I'm still eating my churro when I decide I now need to go get a corn dog over there. And I'm still eating my corn dog when I decide I need the Dole Whip over there. It's the same thing with collecting. We are surrounded by things that we like. Don't feel like you have to be constrained and contain yourself into just what you started as your goal. It's okay to expand it. It's okay to broaden it. And it doesn't mean that you just lost focus and now you failed and now it's bigger than you. No, that's all part of it. What's all part of it is the evolution. You started something as tier 1 only players, and now you're in tier 2 and 3 as well, and that's great. That is absolutely great. That's not a fail. That's a success. Because now your world of things that you get to check out and look at just broadened. And that's a good thing. If there were only 5 that we were focused on, and you went to a show and you went through each case and they didn't have that card, so you just kept on moving. You just kept on moving. And you only looked, and the only time you ever looked is if it was one of those 5 cards. You have really... You have created a situation where you don't get to fully enjoy what you're around. If you go to Yosemite and the only thing you care about is checking out Half Dome, and you don't even look at anything else, you're missing out on a whole bunch of beautiful stuff that's all around you. Don't miss out on all that beautiful stuff that's all around you. Be okay broadening your horizons. That's totally fine. I think that that's perfectly acceptable. Now, to ask your question about, or answer your question or give my opinion about your Ernie Banks question. I feel like this is, again, a difficult question. I love Ernie Banks, okay? Ernie Banks is beloved. Ernie Banks was a very, very good player. Is he a tier 1 player? Well, it depends. Are we talking tier 1 statistically? Or are we talking a tier 1 figure? Like, Mickey Mantle was insanely good. But as far as a beloved player, he's at the very, very top of the list. But if we talk about statistical player, then I think people would agree there are several above him. So if we're talking about Ernie Banks as a tier 1 statistical player or a tier 1 beloved player, those are different things. And again, I really like him. Now, if you're a giant Cubs fan, that's going to be different than if you're a giant White Sox fan, right? So your perspective is going to be different. But you're asking me my opinion. I don't think there are many people that in the history of baseball, in the history of the golden era of baseball, that are much more likable than Ernie Banks. Huge smile, great guy, Chicago Cubs. over 500 home runs. But, his career average is like 275. His, I think his WAR, in fact, I looked it up. I want to say his WAR was like 125, or it was not in the top 100 of all time. And a lot of people value WAR. Now, do you value WAR? I mean, I think it's interesting. I think it's a stat that tells us something. And he's not in the top 100. So if a guy doesn't have a WAR in the top 100, it's hard for me to think that they're a top tier 1 guy, statistically speaking. As far as a personality from the golden age of baseball, there are not many that, to me, as a person, as an icon, that would be too much bigger than than Ernie Banks. So, as a figure, as an icon, as a key figure in the golden age of baseball, I think he's pretty much, right there in the, bottom of the top tier. But if we're talking statistically in the history of baseball, I think he's not in the top tier, because he doesn't even have a WAR over 100. He doesn't have 3,000 hits. He doesn't have the crazy batting average in, well over 300 and some of those things. So I probably didn't answer your question, and that's okay for me. That's okay. So it depends on your perspective. Golden era of baseball, all-time top icons, he's a tier 1 guy. Baseball player, statistics speaking, in the history of baseball, I don't think he is a tier 1 guy with Roberto Clemente and Hank Aaron and Willie Mays and, those guys. All right, I'm going to stop the list right there before I get myself into any trouble. So those are my 5 questions. I hope that you can tell how much I like this. In order for me to continue to do this, though, you have to send me questions. So please don't hesitate. If you ask me a question and I don't answer it this week, I'll answer it soon. I promise I will answer it soon. If I forget about it, send it again and I will answer it soon. But if you have a question, just send it. I look forward to reading them. I look forward to hearing your responses. I look forward to hearing those of you that agree with some of the things that I had to say today. And I also look forward to hearing what some of you thought you don't agree with. That's okay too. Again, this is a great community of very knowledgeable collectors. And I value all of your opinions. And I look forward to hearing what you all have to say. And I look forward to those questions for next week. So down below, type them out. Thanks so much.